Okay, so you ready to get started?
I am ready to get started.
All right. Thank you very much. This is Real Talk, where we enjoy talking with real, everyday leaders about really interesting things. And I'm so pleased today to be talking with Barbara Bell. Barbara, how are you doing today?
I am doing fantastic. I'm so pleased to be talking today.
You are in your home in Nashville today, and Barbara has an amazing work experience. I don't know what you want to call it, history, career, multiple
Journey,
careers,
whatever you want to
journey.
call it.
I like that
Pretty
idea.
unique.
Yes, very, very unique.
Mhm.
And I want, Barbara, you to be able to tell your story. So let's just start. How did you get, you've been a naval officer, a pilot in the Navy, an educator, probably some other things in there that I'm forgetting about, a mother,
Consultant, coach.
all of that. Yeah. So you go back as far as you want to go back and kind of bring us up to current day real quickly, and then we'll go back and dive into the details. Okay.
Okay, we'll do that. So, one thing that I usually start with is I say that, I know what it is to walk into a room and to be immediately noticed, to have my credentials questioned because of my gender. And I also know after, this incredible journey that I've been on, I know what it is to walk into a room and command that attention and to use it for a greater good. So I think back, years and years ago, I could take you back to, laying on my back, the grass in my backyard and looking up at the sky and seeing the clouds and thinking about flying and not really knowing where that was going. Women, there were not many women that were flying in the 1970s. And then I think of how my parents always encouraged us to go to college. They really said, you're going to college, find a way to get there. So that was imprinted in us, my two brothers and myself, from a very early age. And we did not have the finances to go to a decent school. So I remember my older brother, his high school football coach encouraged him to take a look at the Air Force Academy. And so Dan took a look at it, and then he applied and he ultimately went there. And so going out to see him for Parents Weekend out in Colorado Springs, and I looked around and I saw all the opportunity that he had, and I just knew I would settle for nothing less than that. But for me, I didn't want to follow Dan in his footsteps. I was done being his little sister. So I started exploring the Naval Academy. And women had, in 1976 is when the US decided to allow women into the service academies. They had passed, Ford passed the law, I think it was the year prior, that opened up service academies to women. And I was looking at, my options were community college, which was right behind my house. Behind my high school. And that would have just felt like I'd never left school. So I applied to the Naval Academy, not really knowing what kind of woman goes to school there. So I applied and I was accepted, and it took me probably a month to decide whether I was going to indeed go there. But in 1979, I entered the U.S. Naval Academy and the 4th class of women to attend that school.
Wow.
So this was the first year that women were in all 4 classes. So I've got some pictures to share, and then we'll use those. We've talked about this, Mark. We'll use those to kind of travel through the storyline.
That'd be great. And so are you the middle child of the 3 of you then?
I am the middle child.
So a brother, and then you, and then another brother underneath.
And another brother. And what's kind of remarkable in our family too is that my younger brother went to the Air Force Academy.
Okay.
So for you parents out there, my parents spent nothing on our education.
It's a great.
They paid their taxes, so that way they paid for our education.
No, I know a lot of. For example, I've got 5 or 6 friends that are dentists, and they all went through the military to get their education too. So yeah, it's a great route. Yeah.
I'm from a small town, and it's a way to change your life, and indeed it has.
Barbara, are you still connected, fairly well connected to your brothers today?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Hmm.
And they're out of the military, they're out of the service, I take it. They're doing other things now?
Right, they're doing other things. I was the only one who made a career of it.
Okay, gotcha.
They both, my older brother got out after 5 years, and my younger brother, I think he spent about 8 years, but he has retired from the reserves.
Gotcha. All right. Well, and you've got some really interesting slides, pictures. So let's get into those. Let's see if we
All
can
right.
get it up. And
Here we go. So here, July 6, 1979, there is Barbara Bell and Leela Tarr. I am a plebe. I'm officially a plebe. So in 1979, on the 6th, I raised my hand. I always say I gave up a couple of constitutional rights, and I became part of the U.S. Navy. So I really laugh when I see this picture. You can look at the perplexed look in my face.
you're the one on the right, right?
I'm the one on the right.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
You know, they were still working to get prepared to have women there. You can see they didn't have pants that were long enough for me.
You're tall.
A little on the tall side. So there I am at the U.S. Naval Academy, entering with the 4th class of women to join that school. So to say that it was a challenge is probably an understatement. During my first year, we had a couple of events that were very difficult to get through. We had, while the law said that we could be there, so much of what we experienced said we didn't belong. But we kept at it.
Yeah.
And we kept at it and built a bit of resilience and persistence in doing so.
And I just want to make sure I got this right. You were the first class that would go through the entire 4 years, correct?
No, the other women had gone through, you know, they brought the first class of women in 1976. So by the time I got there, they had become seniors.
Okay. All right.
So it was the first time that, yeah.
This is just really new though, isn't it? 76 on.
It was, yeah, it was brand new. Many of the Ivy League schools during that same time frame, they were going co-ed. So it was part of a cultural shift and a push to open up more opportunities for women. For me, it was the fact that our nation recognized that they could no longer exclude women from this elite commissioning source. Mm-hmm. The service academies are where you get the majority of your officers, your military officers.
Right.
150 years of tradition doesn't change overnight. But we became those change agents.
Okay.
And then here's the next slide, because we don't do this alone. Absolutely not. So this is me, senior year. I think it's one of our last parades just prior to graduation. So Millie is on the left. She became a Marine Corps officer, and Karen is on the right, and she became a surface warfare officer or a ship driver. I became an aviator. So each of us chose some pretty new ground to, continue on down. I think of our time at the Naval Academy, we had about 250 women total and about 4,000 men. So at that time, women represented about 6% of the student body at the Naval Academy. So they knew every move that we made. There was lots of criticism. There was commentary about, you took a slot from a more qualified male, which I never found to be true. And anyways, to go through the time at the Naval Academy, I think through it right now, and to try to describe that in just a few minutes is quite a task. But I don't want to get stopped there. So it was a remarkable time. We dealt with a lot of challenges. These two roommates, we lived together for the entire 4 years, and as I just said recently, Millie and I just went on a COVID 2020 road trip together.
Okay. Yeah. So you grew close together.
Yes, and we're remarking about that. It's like, how is it we got along so well for 2 weeks on a road trip? And I said, I think we bonded pretty well years ago.
That's cool. That's
So
great.
I was a systems engineering major. And then as I was trying to decide what I was going to do in my future, I started looking at aviation. And I will tell you, while I was at the Naval Academy, I met the very first woman to graduate from Navy Test Pilot School. She was a lieutenant. She had gone to Purdue University. And when I think of Colleen, I just think of the importance of role models so early on in our lives. And Colleen was that to me.
Mm.
She gave me 4 pieces of advice as to how I would get to test pilot school. And I followed each and every one of those points. And I'll just hold on to that thought.
Okay.
But here's the class of women I graduated with. So we started with 90 women, and 53 of us graduated. So if you want to think of some women that know what it means, what grit and determination and persistence looks like, I can introduce you to 52 other women.
They made it all the way through, which I'm sure there's some, with even on the side with the men, there's fallout, right? Because this isn't easy for anyone. Right?
Absolutely. Right. The attrition rate among women in my class is about twice that of the men.
For other reasons, for additional reasons.
I would say, yeah, probably for additional reasons. I mean, the service academy is not for everyone, and you need to want to be there.
And as you mentioned, though, this was news. So the even though the laws allowed you to be there, it still wasn't you. It was harder. It was more difficult for a woman to
absolutely
be there because of the culture, I guess. Would you call it culture and the attitudes at the time, or
culture, the history?
Yeah.
You know, as I said, when I often think of my plebe year. Yeah, and there were a couple other events that happened, and it was sometimes it was quite lonely. You know, we often felt like islands in a big sea of men, but we kept at it. We did, because we knew we were doing something much bigger than ourselves, and we were changing the course of naval history.
And you're in this picture somewhere.
I am in this picture somewhere. I'm like top over to the right, you know, the
oh, there you are. Yep.
See me? Okay. I see both of us, our little side screen that covers me at this moment.
Oh, okay. Yeah, looks like you're this, if I see you, you're the second face in from the right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's it.
That's great. That's cool.
So let's go on to the next. So when you complete your time at the Naval Academy, you go through what's called service selection. And for me, I decided I was going to go fly. I did not have 20/20 vision, so I became a naval flight officer as opposed to a pilot. I am a pilot, private pilot on my own, but I went off to flight school. And again, there are more challenges. I think if I thought that I was in the minority when I was at the Naval Academy, I was even more so going through flight school. There were only a couple women, maybe 5 that went through flight school the year that I did. Mm-hmm. So I was following Lieutenant Nevius's advice because she had just lit this fire under me that I was not only going to go to test pilot school, but I would ultimately go on to, or not only go to flight school, but go on to test pilot school. And one thing she challenged me to do was to graduate at the top of my class. So I put in extra time, extra trainers. I had a great mentor who came alongside me partway through flight school, and I was able to graduate at the top of my class. Navy tradition at that time states that if you graduate at the top of your class, you get your first choice of aircraft. However, there was some fine print, and that fine print was unless you're a woman.
Oh.
And really the fine print was not just unless you're a woman. What was in place were the combat exclusion laws, which legally prevented women from flying in operational aircraft. So not to be deterred, I got A3. I didn't even know what an A3 aircraft was, but they told me if you go to the museum next door out back, where they don't mow around the aircraft anymore, there's one there.
Okay, so this one.
Okay. But again, sometimes opportunities come in really unique packages. So this was my first fleet aircraft, the A3. This is a picture up in Elmendorf Air Force Base in Alaska. So I was selected to go fly the A3. I was very fortunate that I got an entire robust training curriculum down in Key West, Florida, after I had left Pensacola. I was able to I graduated at the top of my flight school class. Colleen said, you have to get 1,000 hours of flight time. I got 1,000 hours of flight time. I was your go-to person, anytime, anywhere. I went out flying. Then her third piece of advice was to get as many qualifications as you could possibly get as soon as possible. So I did that. I received multiple qualifications in that aircraft and in my squadron. And then her fourth piece of advice was to tell every commanding officer that you want to go to test pilot school. And I find that those pieces of advice, those 4 points, are really relevant today. It's not just about aviation. In the business world, or in higher education while you're in college, work hard, graduate at the top of your flight school class, then go on and get your experience, whether that's 1,000 hours or whether that's 10,000, as we speak of. Go get those, go put your time in, get additional qualifications, invest in yourself, and then tell people what you want to do next and ask for them to help you along the way. So I applied to test pilot school, and then I remember telling my career manager that that's what I wanted to do. And he looked at me and said, but that's hard. And you have to have an excellent record. He said, like mine. And I thought, wow, I've graduated from the Naval Academy. I have a systems engineering degree. You obviously haven't taken a look at my record. I didn't say that to him. I learned at the Naval Academy that what is in my head does not immediately come out my mouth. But I thought, we'll just let the selection board tell me whether they're going to select me or not. And the answer was yes. I was selected to go to Navy test pilot school, and then I got to fly a lot of really cool airplanes. So
I would say he was right. I mean, it was hard, right? What you're talking about.
It was hard, but I thought that he was probably going to pat me on the head and say, honey, go on your way.
Yeah. No, it's very obviously it's impressive to the rest of us all, regardless of our gender. I mean, we dream about. I've seen the photo that you're going to show next. I can't imagine what that was like to fly that thing.
So I went to test pilot school, and throughout my career, I've flown about 35 different types of aircraft, and I've got about 1,600 hours of flight time. Once I went to test pilot school, and that's where I got to merge my love of flying with my engineering degree. That's the hardest I've ever worked in my life. But then I got to fly this, which is the EA-6B. Yeah, not super sexy, but then I got to fly. Then I got to fly the F-14.
Yeah, that looks amazing.
And that was pretty stunning. This was post Top Gun era. The F-14 was the premier fighter at that time. So I got to fly that. I got to fly the F-18. So here's the F-18. Now we have the Super Hornet today. This is a single-seater. I flew the 2-seat model of this aircraft. So again, opportunities sometimes come in unusual packages. Then about this time, I finished test pilot school. I went to my test squadron. I got to fly the F-18, the EA-6B, as well as the F-14. And about this time, the first Gulf War was ending, and the conversation started about what women could do. Women could fly only in a support role. They were in the first Gulf War. They could go to the front lines, but they couldn't carry any defensive weapons. So the time had come to change the law. All right, do you know who this woman is over on the right, or what she used to be?
I don't, but she looks familiar. When I saw this photo earlier, I think, okay, that's somebody, I should know who that is. So tell me, who is it?
So this is Betty Archibald, and she was one of the women Air Force service pilots, the women that flew in World War II. You know, as I mentioned previously, we don't do this alone. I had these fabulous roommates, but I also had the women Air Force service pilots who were, you know, the first wave of pioneers. And when this conversation started in the early 90s about what women could do, and the question about expanding roles for women in military aviation, we went to Capitol Hill. I went with the organization called Women Military Aviators Incorporated, which included many of the WASP pilots, as well as we worked with the National Organization of Women. And we went around Capitol Hill educating our congressmen and congresswomen about what women could do in terms of flying. We didn't lobby because in the military you can't lobby, but you can certainly educate. So we educated, and the WASP came behind us. By this point, they were probably in their 70s, and they were well connected socially and politically, and they came behind us. And Congress listened, and in 1993, they repealed the first set of combat exclusion laws, which opened up operational aircraft and operational ships to women. So there's Betty, and I just love this photo because it's one generation looking and honoring the next. So they changed the law in 1993. I was considered too senior to go to an operational squadron, but you know, that's okay. That's okay with me. You know, after my time on Capitol Hill, I had multiple other assignments. From there, I went to Naval Postgraduate School. I got a master's degree in astronautical engineering. I then became an integration and test lead for the National Reconnaissance Office on one of their newest satellite systems. From there, I returned back to Patuxent River, Maryland, and I worked in the EA-6B Prowler Program Office, installing new sorts of systems into current aircraft. And then I was selected for my first command. So my first command was in Melbourne, Australia. I worked for the Defense Contract Management Agency, Australia. We managed US Department of Defense and other agency contracts with Australia and New Zealand. It was a hardship tour. It was great being in Australia. I got to do some representational work with the US consulate, as my office was co-located with the US consulate, and it just, you know, broadened my perspective tremendously. Yeah. But that was the first time that I was formally in command. After that, I went to Memphis, Tennessee, because for some reason the Navy has a base in Memphis, Tennessee. I became a career manager. Unlike the career manager who was trying to dash my hopes of going to test pilot school, I was encouraging those within my career field, you know, to go on to whatever their next job might be. And then I have to laugh a little bit because while I was in Memphis, I ran the test pilot selection boards, as well as the Navy astronaut selection board. So I'd like to tell that gentleman that I went on to run those boards. I came back to Pax River. I was a chief of staff, and then was promoted to captain. And I took over, I was selected for my second command, which was as the program manager for all the Navy and Marine Corps air traffic control and combat identification systems. It's what's called a major program, major command. And I was the first woman in the job. But by this time, I'd certainly gotten used to being one of the only or the only. And so I reflect on that job. And here's this woman from a small town in Michigan who knew she wanted more, and she went off to the Naval Academy knowing that that was going to change her world. In this job, I had a $400 million annual budget and a $1.2 billion New Start program. I got lots of visibility at the Pentagon because my programs were attached to several other large programs. That's where we'll talk about this in just a little bit. That's where I really solidified my leadership skills and my framework. After that position, I retired from the Navy because I felt it was time to say goodbye. My kids needed some time and attention. So I retired from the Navy, moved out west. That's where I met you, Mark, and spent time with my kids. I was consulting in the aerospace industry, and it just felt like it wasn't filling me up any longer. I had always had a pull towards education. So as a result of a couple life events, I decided I was going to change my life. So my daughter and I moved to Nashville, Tennessee, where I started my doctorate in education at Vanderbilt University. So at Vanderbilt, I got my degree, my EDD, and in higher education leadership and policy. And then along the way, I discovered the Center for STEM Education for Girls here in Nashville, Tennessee. That intrigued me because as an engineer and a woman who's worked many technical programs, just that opportunity to raise the next generation of young women. So I went and checked out. I wanted to see what is the center all about. So I went over to I met with the director, and we had a great conversation, and she told me she was leaving her position. So it was lots of serendipity there. So I am now the director of the Center for STEM Education for Girls at the Harpeth Hall School in Nashville, Tennessee. And that's what I'm doing presently. I think I have one more slide. Oh yeah, this is what I really like to do. I said education has definitely been a part of my life from the very beginning. I like going out and meeting with students and kids to help develop that next generation. All right, I have one more slide, and then we'll get off of this topic. But education and aviation just opened the world to me. You know, education changed my life, and I am dedicating to changing the lives of others through education. So that's my story.
That is awesome. You mentioned one aspect that I think is worthy of pointing out even more amongst the awesome stuff that you've done in your career, is that you've raised kids. I met one of your daughters before we started.
Right.
And she's one of your kids. You said plural kids. How many kids do you have?
I have two. My son is now 20, so he's out of the house, and my daughter is 15.
Okay, so you've been doing all of this, and you're also a mother.
Yes.
So that by itself is hard, right? That's not easy to be a parent.
No, it's not.
You did all this other stuff. Okay, great. Well, there's more that I know that we want to talk about on here.
Okay.
Would you like to share with me, I don't know how you want to get into this, but you're just kind of your leadership philosophy is what I would like to call it. And I know you've got a values-based model that you use as part of your leadership philosophy, your leadership model. And I assume that that's been important to you. It sounds like it's something that you've developed that's helped you in your leadership capacity. But you've also shared that. You've helped other leaders grow with that model. So can you talk to us about that?
Absolutely. Yes, when I think of values-based leadership, one of the very first things that I think about is leadership by example, that we have to be that example to others in order for our team members to follow us. Absolutely. And I also know that good leadership requires a bit of introspection, which can often be challenging for people who are more extroverted to look inside themselves. But I know when I was headed towards my first command, I needed to really understand who was I as a leader and who was I going to be as I moved into this new organization. Because what I know as a leader going into a new organization, the very first thing people want to know is, who are you? You know, sometimes they can dance around, and we could spend, 6 or 8 months where your team members are trying to figure out, who are you as a leader? So what I knew is that I had to look at, who am I, and who am I at this point in the journey? For example, I had my first command, my second command, I'm in another leadership role, and I have changed and grown along the way. I wouldn't say that my values have changed. Then I looked at, as part of this introspective journey, like, what do I really value? And so I looked at that. I spent time, writing it down. I had big sheets of paper, and I used little stickies and all that to really solidify, what are my values? And so I wrote those down. And then it's not only that, I could say what my values are to my new organization, but you have to live them. So the next part was, what are the behaviors that are going to demonstrate my values? So I wrote that down. And as I went on this journey of who am I, what do I value, what are these behaviors, that's really when I could get to the vision that I had for my organizations. And I see that this is a reflexive cycle, because your values, your behaviors inform your values. Mm-hmm. We think it goes one way, but it goes both ways. Your values should inform your behaviors. And as we continue to move forward into our leadership journey, we need to keep asking that question, who am I now? Reevaluate our values. Yes, those still hold true. Look at the behaviors, and then what is my vision? And I write it up it's kind of in a circle. So a real concrete example of what I did with this values-based leadership model is as I was taking over my program manager job. So first woman in the position, everyone was going to watch me. I'd lived that pretty much my entire career. Mm-hmm. So I developed a vision for my organization, actually a motto. So as I was thinking, why do people come to work every day? They need to understand that, we could say what's in it for me, but why do I come to work? And so we had air traffic, in this specific example, air traffic control and combat identification systems. I thought, what is that all about? And then this motto from, I think it was the 70s, drive 55 and bring them back alive. And I thought, that's what we do. We allow our aviators to go out 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and we bring them back alive. So I wrote down my values. I put them in draft format. I started with, here's my motto for the organization. Here are my values with behaviors attached, so people could understand what to expect from me. Things like teamwork and integrity and respect. Believing in professional development and taking time to, as they used to say, sharpen the saw. Mm-hmm. I wrote all those things down. And my very first day on the job, I met with my leadership team and I handed out my values, again, in draft form. And I said that I'd like you to take a look at these values and understand, if you have any questions, please ask. Or if there's something I need to clarify, please help me with that. And my leadership team gave me feedback. And I incorporated that feedback into my value statement, because I was going to show them from the very beginning, I was going to listen. So several more days into the job, I had my entire organization come together. Now we had a video teleconference, or we would Zoom today, with all the organizations that were not co-located. And I delivered my personal value statement. Also with the challenge that these values would become the values of the organization. And I was just amazed with what happened. Whenever anyone new came into the organization, they got a half hour with me, and I went through my value statement. It's kind of laying expectations for them. Mm-hmm. And I was astounded. I had people that had worked for the government for 20 to 30 years and had never had a half hour with their captain. And I did things like respect. They only got a half hour because the way I demonstrated respect is that we were going to start on time and we were going to end on time. Then on every anniversary of my time in that job, I delivered my value statement again. I had people take the value statement and paste it next to their desk. I remember one team member, he came to me and he said, I need to talk to you about respect. It was, I call it the third thing. So we pointed to respect, and he told me what was going on with his team lead, and that he was not being respected. So he opened the door for me to have a conversation with the team lead and say, you know, Don tells me that there's an issue of respect here. And I remember this gentleman saying, well, I have to tell you that in last week's meeting, I felt you disrespected me. And I said, well, here was my leadership moment. I said, then I apologize. I said, my intention, Tony, was not to be disrespectful to you. My intention was to hold you accountable. And I said, I want you to make decisions. You're very senior, make the decision. And by having that conversation, he started making decisions. He started improving dramatically in his role. He left my office and went on to an even larger position. So people could come and they could come and talk to me about something very specific. And then my team members, I always use the word team because that's how we do things. We get it done as a team. And they asked if they could put together a welcome aboard package for new team members. And I said, certainly, go ahead. And within it was the organization's values that looked just like my draft values. So they became the values of the organization. So when I consult and I consult with leaders, values clarification is hugely important. And it's important that we take that risk to tell our own story, and that we tell people who we are and what we value and what behaviors they can expect from us and what our vision is. So that's kind of it's worked extremely well in many different positions that I've had in leadership. And so I very much recommend that process, that framework, or a similar framework. It's got to work for you, but write it down. What is it that you value?
Yeah, it sounds like you have been very intentional about it, that they believed you, you had credibility behind what you were communicating with them. I love the 30 minutes with each new member of your organization. How many, just to give me an idea, in that one, you've done this with different organizations that you've been at the head of.
Right.
Are we talking, how many people were under your?
I had 600.
600. Okay, we're not talking 6 people, we're talking 600 people. Yeah.
We're talking 600 people.
That's awesome. So the leadership has to cascade down, right? Your influence.
Absolutely.
Yeah, awesome. That's great. I'm sure you thought about putting this in a book.
I wrote a thesis on it.
Okay. You wrote a thesis on
values-based leadership.
Awesome. And you have a book in the works, right?
I do. I have a book in the works. Absolutely.
Will this be in the book, or is it a different?
This might be the next book,
okay.
Values-based leadership. Yes. So my first book, I vowed during the beginning of this, this COVID stay-at-home time that I was going to finish my book. So I finished it at the beginning of June. It's out for editing right now. It's called Lessons Learning to Fly.
Okay.
And I'm targeting young women. Using my story. It's part memoir, but I did not want it to be entirely memoir, because I want it to be something that you take with you and you do something with it. So my lessons are interwoven into the story. So
it's your experiences, your memoir, but also kind of a field book or guidebook for young women, that are going to spread their wings and go do things.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Good. And so give me the name of it again one more time.
It's currently called Flight Lessons Learning to Fly.
Okay. And it's not out yet, but soon. It's in the editing stage, which
It's in the editing stage, so I don't know. This environment, we'll see. You know, it's I'm working with a fantastic woman who's a book developer, and so it's in editing with her her group, and then we'll be pitching it soon.
that's awesome. That's great. I admire that you're doing that, period. I know you and I have a mutual friend in Molly Davis
Mm-hmm.
who's written, she writes a lot, and she's written a book, and she's a good friend and colleague of mine for years. And she keeps nudging me gently, Mark, you should write a book. You should write a book. So someday I'll have to do that. So I can't wait to read your books, because
Books, yeah.
the next one should be the values-based leadership model or something, include
Mm-hmm.
that. That would be cool.
Yeah.
So we don't have a lot of time, but there's another aspect of you and who you are in your life, your life's work, which is current. Can you talk to us more about really you're the executive director of
I'm the director of the
director?
center. It's a long title. It's the Center for STEM Education for Girls. And I'm at the Harpeth Hall School here in Nashville. And so we are dedicated to developing the next generation of girls and women in STEM, working along different parts of that pipeline. I'm currently at a 5th through 12th grade school. So I'm responsible for coordination of STEM activities within the school, but also outreach throughout the greater Nashville area, and I would say across the nation as well. So we're promoting 5 best practices for girls in STEM.
That's amazing. That's great. And you're enjoying that. You're loving that.
I'm enjoying that. I'm writing about it. And those 5 best practices, it's not something that is just particular to our school, but is something it's really critical. When we began our very first, conversation, or our pre-conversation before we had this event, we were talking about how in this Zoom world, we no longer have to be perfect. And so one of our big points of best practice is taking risks. The girls need to learn how to take risks, and they don't have to be perfect. And then inquiry-based and project-based learning, doing hands-on learning. Great driving questions produce great products. Then for girls and for, I would say for women as well, tying learning to a higher purpose. I always say that, you can ask a boy to code something up and he'll code it, but a girl wants to know why. How's this going to help others? Mm-hmm. Then one thing we know from research is that girls must develop their 3D spatial skills. There's a demonstrated gap between boys and girls in terms of 3D spatial skills. Dr. Cheryl Sorby, she's dedicated her career to understanding that and providing curricula so that girls can develop those 3D spatial skills, idea of rotation and translation, whether that is nature or nurture, we know we can close the gap. And then exposure to role models. And that really cycles back to what I'm doing today and what I've done for many years as I progressed in my career and then went into consulting. My work as a role model was highly critical.
That's awesome. That's great. And then I know that you have used 3 words. I think that they by themselves are a great philosophy too. The engage, educate, empower.
Yes.
Can you talk about how that weaves into who you are and how you show up? And
Oh, absolutely. That was a title of a talk that I gave several years ago. And as we developed those 3 words, it's like, oh, that's absolutely what I do. We have to engage with one another, and telling your story, just like I demonstrated today, telling my story is hugely critical. And then asking people what their story is. It's really easy to make assumptions about someone's story. I was talking to a friend, and you could just guess that he had lived a life of privilege, but it was completely opposite to that. Mm-hmm. And so that creates that empathy. So engaging with one another by telling stories, back and forth is so critical. and educate. And I'd say when we engage, we also educate one another.
Mm-hmm.
We learn from each other. But the education can also be investing in yourself and investing in others. I sought additional education. I sought additional professional development. I have used a coach on multiple occasions. I highly recommend having a coach, but you do that with your team members as well. You help them, you help them figure out their path. So you engage and you educate, and that really leads to empowerment. And what I know for sure is educated team members can change the world. They can change your organization, and they can change the world. I learned the power of empowerment years ago from my very favorite mentor. So engage, educate, and empower.
That's awesome. Thank you.
That's who I am, and that's what I do.
That's who you are, and that's what you do. That's wonderful. So I got two final questions for you. I'm going to go out on a limb here.
All right.
So,
Going out on a
shut
limb.
me down if you want. But if you were to offer just one piece of advice or wisdom or takeaway for female leaders out there in the workplace, I know it's probably hard to reduce it to one, and then I'm going to ask you also the same for male leaders out there, for men out there in the workplace. From your experience and from what you've seen and and what your heart tells you, what would be those two pieces of advice for the women leaders out there, and then for the men, the male leaders out there?
I think of my experience as being a woman in a fairly male-dominated environment, so that's somewhat of my context. And so my advice is, if you're going to stand out, then stand out. I was never going to fit in. I was never going to be like the guys. So I chose to stand out. And I did it in a multitude of ways. So that's my advice to women. Instead of complaining and I'm the only one, it's all right. Stand out and stand out.
Stand out strong.
Yes, absolutely.
Awesome. And how about for men leaders?
And for male leaders, I don't know, but no. And for male leaders, tell people who you are. Take a risk, be vulnerable, tell people who you are. In our culture, particularly on men, it's keep everything close held.
Yeah. Awesome. Good. Absolutely. Anything else you'd like to share with us, Barbara, in this precious time that you've given us?
Oh, I kind of laugh because I think Molly is going to be upset if I don't talk about my exercise program.
Oh, yeah. I didn't even know about that part. Yeah, let's talk about that.
It even goes back to the, if you're going to stand out, then stand out. So when I had my huge role as a Navy program manager, I realized I wasn't getting enough exercise. So I was a runner, and it's hard to, take an hour and change. So I thought I could go for a walk.
Yeah.
And then I thought I could take people with me.
Yeah, that's right. I do remember that.
So it was called our command exercise program, also known as Take the Captain for a Walk. So I announced that to my organization, and I said, please go see Bonnie, who was my fantastic assistant. I said, and get on my calendar and we'll go for a walk. And I went around a couple of people's offices and I say, hey, you haven't gotten on the command exercise program yet. And I remember this one gentleman, Steve, he got really flustered and he said, I ran this morning. And I said, well, I'd just love to go for a walk with you.
Yeah.
And what I learned from the people who worked for me was astounding. One gentleman told me that he was a better father because his second son was special needs. A woman told me about her journey with breast cancer. Another woman, as we went walking, she turned to me and she said, I would just like to know how you're doing. It gave her that opportunity. Another person came and said, I can't be out in the sun. Could we go to lunch? And I said, certainly. Then I remember another gentleman, and he was, we had lunch together, and he was complaining about so-and-so, the next building down. And so I said, well, how often have you gone down there? And he was just about to get out of his mouth, I don't have time. And he realized I had taken an hour to have lunch with him. So that stopped. So
That's
yeah,
awesome.
take the boss for a walk.
Yeah, I think that that's great. That's something to take note, make that a habit, right? That's a great takeaway for leaders. And so you went on many, many of those.
I went on many of those walks. I had, one of my team leads, he would call me up periodically and he said, hey, I've got my walking points ready. Let's go for a walk. And, so sometimes we talked about personal lives. A lot of times we talked about, our professional work, and we talked about, the challenges he was having in his program. And for anyone who has children, the best way to talk with them is to probably get into a car and you're not looking at each other.
Right. Yeah.
So it was fantastic.
Walking points versus talking points.
Yep, he had walking points. Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. Yeah, I can see it changes the dynamics of a one-on-one. It can be a great type of one-on-one. Well, I'm glad that we remembered that part. That's
yeah, I thought Molly's gonna be upset if I don't talk about that one.
For sure. All right. Well, Barbara, thank you so much for your time today. This has been amazing. It's been great. And then we'll have to do this again, okay?
Yes, let's do that again.
All right. Thank you. Have a great day.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day. Bye-bye.